All right, so moving right along with our trig topic. Today we're going to be evaluating both radians and degrees. You have two options when you are asked to evaluate trig. You can either, these are your two options. You can either change the mode in the calculator before every problem. Okay, and what I mean by that, I have this zoomed in over here. I have a screenshot rather of the calculator. If you press mode on your calculator, I don't know what calculator you guys are using. I know that if you go to Texas Instruments, they're allowing you guys to download the calculators for a certain time trial. But if you press mode, you see the fourth thing on the list is radian versus degree. Before you type it in, you would have to make sure that you're using the right mode. If you see a degree symbol, then it needs to be in degrees. If you don't see a degree symbol, then it's most likely going to be radians. Okay, that could mean it involves a pi. Usually it does, but it doesn't have to. So if you want to go ahead and change the mode before every problem, so for example, if I ask you to do the sine of pi is radian, so you would have to put it in radian mode. Or if I ask you to do the sine of 180 degrees, then you would have to put it into degree mode. If you don't want to worry about that, then what you have to do, your other option, is you could keep the calculator in degree mode. That way you don't have to worry about it. You can keep the calculator in degree mode and just convert any radians into degrees, into its equivalent degree measurement. So for example, pi radians is 180 degrees. So that's what we did last week. You guys were actually pretty good at that, right? That's a pretty easy conversion to go back and forth. In order for you to do that, I don't know if you remember, you would replace the pi with 180, okay? So that's if you don't want to have to go back and forth between the calculator. I'm going to assume that most of you are going to want to do option 2. So that's what I'm going to do with you on the bottom of this. If you are not going to do that, if you want to do option 1 and change the mode, you can type the question in as is. You just have to make sure it's in the right mode beforehand, okay? I'll explain it once we get to the examples. Also, before we get started, you have to know the exact decimals that I had you guys write down last week. So these decimals, you can have them in front of you, right? All of your assessments right now are pretty much open notes. So have this in front of you whenever you're doing homework or whatnot. The square root of 3 over 2 is 0.8660. So if you type something into the calculator and you get 0.8660, blah, 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 that's one of your special decimals. You're not going to write down the decimal. You're going to write the square root of 3 over 2. The square root of 2 over 2 is 0.7071. So if you're doing something in the calculator and that number is what you get, you're going to write square root of 2 over 2. The square root of 3 over 3 is 0.5773. And the square root of 3 is 1.7320. Okay, so let's look at some of these examples. So your directions say to evaluate the following trig functions using exact value. Okay, so the cosine of 120 degrees. This example is in degrees, so go to your mode, make sure you're in degree mode to start. You can then just type right into the calculator cosine of 120. All right, that gives you a decimal. That decimal is negative 0.5. So the cosine of 120 degrees is negative 1/2. Done. That one's very straightforward. Number 2. The sine of 5 pi over 3. So now this is where we're going to get a little interesting. So if you want to just be able to just type it right into the calculator, you have to change the mode first. The tricky part, if you want to change the mode, is that you have to remember to actually do that, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to act like you guys want to do option 2, because that's what I think is really the best one for right now. That way you don't have to worry about going back and forth with the calculator. So the sine of 5 pi over 3. 5 pi over 3 radians, I have to figure out how many degrees that is. So I would do 5 times 180, replace the pi with 180, and that gives me 300 degrees, right? So the sine of 5 pi over 3 is the same thing as the sine of 300 degrees. So I can, if I'm just going to keep my calculator in degree mode, I can then just type in sine 300 degrees. And you would get negative 0.8660 blah, blah, blah. That's one of those special decimals. That special decimal is the square root of 3 over 2. Right, so you got negative 0.8660 dot, dot, dot. So that's really going to be negative square root 3 over 2. You should not be getting any other decimals aside from, unless they're nice and clean. For example, number 1, you got 0.5. Number 2, you got something wacky, but that something wacky was one of my 4 main decimals that I can get. Let's look at number 3. Tangent of pi. Pi, that's in radians. If it doesn't see a degree symbol, just go with that it's in radians. So pi, if you replace the pi with 180, you get just 180. So the tangent of pi is the same thing as the tangent of 180 degrees. So because the calculator is in degree mode, you type in tangent 180 and you get 0. That's it. Number 4. Sine of 225 degrees. That's in degrees, so you can just type it right into the calculator. That gives you negative 0.7071. That decimal goes to the square root of 2 over 2. Just remember that it's negative. Number 5. 11 pi, the cosine of 11 pi over 6. 11 times 180 divided by 6. And again, I'm doing this because I don't want it to be in radians. I want it to be in degrees. That's my preference for right now. That gives me 330 degrees. So the cosine of 11 pi over 6 is the same thing as the cosine of 330 degrees. So I type in cosine of 330 in the calculator. That gives me 0.8660. So my actual answer, the exact value, is the square root of 3 over 2. Okay? These two things right here, it's the same number. It's just that if you write 0.8660, you are rounding that number, and I told you I want the exact value. I want the whole thing. Number 6, the tangent of 330, that is in degrees already. So I just type it right into the calculator. That gives me negative 0.5773. So it's negative square root of 3 over 3. Number 7, the sine of pi over 2, that's in radians. So I replace the pi with 180. So this is really asking me for the sine of 90 degrees. I type that into the calculator and I get 1. The tangent of 4 pi over 3, that's in radians, so I do 4 times 180 divided by 3 to figure out the equivalent degree measure. So 4 pi over 3 radians is the same thing as 240 degrees. So I'm going to type in tangent 240 degrees. And that gives me 1.7320, which is the square root of 3. And that's it. The only other thing that I do want to mention, I'm just going to put a 9 and 10 on here. Well, I'll just put a 9. If you're doing the tangent of 90 degrees, or the tangent of 270, or more, of course, but if you do tangent of 90 degrees, the calculator is going to give you an error message, and the reason why is because the tangent of 90 degrees is undefined. Remember, 90 and 270, the tangent is undefined at, okay? I just don't want there to be any confusion when you go to do your homework tomorrow. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Have a great day.